What happens when Hollywood's most beloved and humble star finally reaches his breaking point on live television? What we witnessed on The View was nothing short of explosive. And it all started when Joy Behar decided to cross a line that should never have been crossed. This confrontation has everyone talking, and by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why Keanu Reeves, the man who never loses his cool, absolutely lost it on national TV. The day began like any other episode of The View. The familiar theme music played. The audience applauded, and the co-hosts took their seats around that iconic table. Joy Behar, as usual, was ready with her sharp tongue and controversial takes. But what she didn't expect was that her guest, Keanu Reeves, would be the one person who wouldn't just sit there and take it. Keanu walked onto the set with his trademark calm demeanor, dressed in a simple black suit and wearing that gentle smile that has charmed millions around the world. The audience erupted in applause as he made his way to the guest chair, waving modestly and taking his seat with the quiet grace of someone who's done 1,000 interviews before. Welcome to The View. Keanu, Whoopi Goldberg said warmly as the applause died down. It's great to have you here. Thank you for having me, Keanu replied, his voice soft and genuine. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. The interview started smoothly. They discussed his latest film project, his passion for motorcycles, and his well-known acts of kindness that have made him an internet legend. Keanu answered every question thoughtfully and humbly, never trying to steal the spotlight or oversell himself. But as the conversation continued, Joy Behar remained unusually quiet. And anyone familiar with her knew that her silence meant she was preparing for something big. She sat there with that familiar smirk, lightly tapping her pen against her notes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Keanu. She finally began, and that's when everything changed. Joy suddenly interjected, cutting off a story Keanu was telling about working with young actors. I have to ask you something that's been bothering me, she said, her tone slicing through the calm rhythm of the conversation. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The other co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances while Keanu turned his full attention to her. His expression still pleasant, but now more focused. Of course, he said simply. What would you like to know? Joy leaned forward, a predatory smile spreading across her face. Well, she began, you've built this whole image around being this nice guy, this humble actor who gives away millions and helps strangers on the street. But I have to wonder, is any of it real? Or is it all just the most elaborate public relations campaign in Hollywood history? The studio fell silent. Even the audience seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the kind of question guests usually faced on The View, especially not someone as universally beloved as Keanu Reeves. His expression didn't change dramatically, but those who knew him could see the subtle tightening around his eyes, the faint shift in his posture. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Could you clarify what you mean by that? Joy wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed almost energized by the tension she had created. Oh, come on, Keanu, she pressed. You're telling me that a Hollywood actor, someone who's made hundreds of millions of dollars, is genuinely this selfless person? That there's no calculation behind all these good deeds? That your whole modest, humble thing isn't just another performance? The other hosts looked visibly uncomfortable. Whoopi Goldberg cleared her throat, clearly hoping to change the direction of the conversation, but Joy wasn't done. Normal people, Joy continued sharply, don't have photographers following them when they do good deeds. Normal people don't have their kindness turned into viral marketing campaigns for their movies. So forgive me if I'm a little skeptical of St. Keanu. Keanu sat still for a long moment, processing what he'd just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a new hardness beneath the surface. Joy, I understand that skepticism is part of your job, he said evenly. But I think you're crossing into territory that's not just unfair, it's cruel. Asterisk, cruel. Joy laughed a short, cutting sound. Oh, please. I'm asking legitimate questions that journalists should be asking. You want cruel? Cruel is manipulating people's emotions for profit. Cruel is building a fake persona to sell movie tickets. That was when something shifted in Keanu's eyes. The man who had endured unimaginable loss with quiet dignity for decades, the man known for his restraint, was finally reaching his limit. You want to talk about manipulation, Joy? He said, his voice low but commanding enough to make everyone lean forward. Let's talk about manipulation. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Keanu Reeves, the man who always avoided confrontation, was now staring directly at Joy Behar with an intensity that made the entire studio hold its breath. Asterisk, you sit at this table every day, Keanu continued, his voice growing stronger, and you tear people down for entertainment. You take someone's genuine attempt to do good in the world and twist it into something cynical and calculated because that's what gets ratings, isn't it, Joy? Joy's smirk faltered slightly, but she still wasn't ready to retreat. I'm a journalist, Keanu, she said defensively. I ask hard questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Asterisk, hard questions. Keanu leaned forward, his calm exterior cracking for the first time. You want to ask hard questions? Then ask me about the work. Ask me about the craft. Ask me about the stories we're trying to tell. But don't you dare sit there and question whether my grief is real, whether my desire to help people is genuine. Don't you dare imply that the loss of my best friend, my daughter, or my sister somehow turned me into a better actor instead of a better person. Asterisk, the mention of his personal losses sent a visible shock through the panel. Even Joy looked momentarily taken aback, though she quickly recovered, her defenses snapping back into place. Now you're being dramatic, she said sharply. I never mentioned your personal tragedies. I'm talking about your public image, your brand. There's a difference. Asterisk. No, Joy, Keanu shot back, his voice rising with an emotion no one had ever seen from him before. There isn't a difference. You can't separate the two when you're attacking someone's character. When you call someone's kindness fake, when you suggest their generosity is calculated, you're attacking everything they are. You're telling the world that goodness doesn't exist, that every decent act must have an ulterior motive. Asterisk, Sonny Hostin tried to intervene, murmuring, maybe we should, but Keanu cut her off firmly. No, he said, his eyes locked on Joy. Let her finish. She clearly has more to say about my so-called manipulation. Please, Joy, enlighten us. Tell us how helping a stranded motorist change a tire is a publicity stunt. Tell us how giving my Matrix salary to the crew was just good business. Explain how privately paying for friends' cancer treatments is somehow calculated marketing. Asterisk, Joy's face was reddening now, her voice rising in pitch. You see? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've got a list ready. You know exactly which good deeds to mention when someone challenges you. That's not genuine kindness. That's crisis management. The audience began to murmur, some clearly uncomfortable with Joy's relentless tone. Asterisk, Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he stood up, catching everyone off guard. You want to know what crisis management looks like, Joy? He said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury. Crisis management is when someone like you gets called out for being unnecessarily cruel on national television. And instead of apologizing, instead of showing an ounce of decency, you double down and attack harder. That's crisis management. Asterisk, I'm not being cruel, Joy insisted, though her voice wavered now. I'm being realistic. I'm being honest. Asterisk, honest. Keanu's laugh was sharp, bitter, and unlike anything the audience had ever heard from him. You want honest. Here's honest or not a journalist. Joy. Journalists seek truth. You seek controversy? Keanu said, his voice steady but edged with fire. You don't care about facts, you care about reactions. You don't want to inform people. You want to upset them? Because upset people keep watching, and watching people make you money. Whoopi tried again to intervene. Keanu, maybe we can, she began, but he held up a hand. No, Whoopi. With all due respect, I'm not finished. He turned back to Joy, who was now shifting uncomfortably in her seat. You want to question my motives? Fine, let's question yours. How much of your salary comes from creating drama? How much of your career is built on tearing down people who can't fight back? And when someone finally does fight? Back when someone finally calls you out for what? You really hide behind the label of journalist like it gives you permission to be heartless. Joy's face was now completely red. Her hand gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. How dare you lecture me about journalism? She snapped. You're an actor. You pretend to be other people for a living. Keanu didn't miss a beat. And you pretend to be a decent human being for a living? He shot back. At least I'm honest about what I do, being pretend. The studio went completely silent. The cameras were still rolling, but it felt as if the air had frozen. This wasn't the calm, composed Keanu Reeves the world knew. This was a man who had finally been pushed too far. Joy tried to regain control. You know what, Keanu? You're proving my point perfectly. The mask is coming off now, isn't it? The real you is coming out and it's not nearly as nice as you pretend to be. Keanu's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow that made it even more powerful. The real me, Joy, is someone who has buried more people than anyone should have to bury. The real me is someone who wakes up every day and chooses to try to make the world a little bit better instead of a little bit worse. The real me is someone who believes that kindness matters, that helping people matters, that treating others with dignity and respect matters. And the real you is someone who just spent 10 minutes on national television trying to convince people that none of those things are real. The words hit Joy like a physical blow. For the first time during the entire exchange, she seemed genuinely speechless. The woman known for always having a comeback sat frozen, her mouth slightly open as she stared at the man who had just stripped away every layer of her defense. But Keanu wasn't done. The floodgates had opened, and decades of restraint of biting his tongue, of taking the high road while others took shots at him, came pouring out. You know what the really tragic part is, Joy? He continued, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. You could use your platform for something meaningful. You could lift people up. You could ask questions that actually matter, that help people understand the world better. But instead, you choose to be a bully. And not just any bully, a bully with a microphone and an audience of millions. Joy finally found her voice again, though it was shakier than before. I am not a bully, she insisted. I ask tough questions. If you can't handle the heat, stop, Keanu interrupted. His single word delivered with such quiet authority that she actually froze mid-sentence. Just stop. You've said enough. Actually, you said enough about 5 minutes ago, but you kept going because that's what you do. You don't know when to stop. You don't know when you've crossed the line from journalism into cruelty, from skepticism into character assassination. Sunny Hostin tried once more to defuse the moment. Maybe we should take a commercial break, No, Keanu said firmly. His eyes still locked on Joy. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now. Because the people watching deserve to see how this ends. They deserve to see what happens when someone finally calls out the playground bully. Joy's defensive anger flared again. Playground bully. Are you kidding me? I'm doing my job. I'm holding celebrities accountable. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked. Asterisk. Whose questions? Joy. Keanu countered, his voice rising with conviction. Who exactly is demanding that you question whether kindness is real? Who is asking you to tear down people who try to do good in the world? Because I'll tell you who's not asking for that. The people who benefit from that kindness. The crew members who got to send their kids to college because I shared my salary with them. The cancer patients who got treatment because someone cared enough to help. The stranded families who made it home safely because someone stopped to change their tire. None of them are asking you to question whether that help was genuine. Asterisk. But the public has a right to know. Joy began, but Keanu cut her off again. The public has a right to know the truth, he said, his tone sharp and unwavering. Not your cynical interpretation of the truth. The public has a right to accurate information, not your bitter commentary masquerading as journalism. And the public has a right to see good things happening in the world, without someone like you immediately telling them it's all fake. Asterisk. The other co-hosts exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncomfortable with how far things had gone, but too stunned to intervene. The studio was silent except for Keanu's words, each one landing with the weight of years of patience, finally running out. This was television history in the making, and everyone in the studio knew it. Joy Behar made one more attempt to regain the upper hand. You know what I think, Keanu? She began, her tone cutting. I think you're having this big emotional outburst because you know I'm right. You're angry because someone finally saw through your act and you can't handle being exposed. That was the moment. That was when Keanu Reeves, the man who had remained calm through decades of loss and pain, finally exploded. Asterisk. Exposed. His voice boomed through the studio, loud enough to make several people flinch. You want to talk about being exposed? Let's talk about what you've exposed here today. Joy, you've exposed yourself as someone so miserable, so bitter, so incapable of believing that good exists in the world that you have to tear down anyone who proves you wrong. Joy tried to interrupt, but Keanu wasn't having it. No, he said sharply. You've had your turn to talk. You've had your turn to attack, to question, to tear down. Now it's my turn. His voice, though loud, was controlled like a precise explosion. You've exposed yourself as someone who thinks cynicism is intelligence, that cruelty is courage, that tearing people down is the same as building yourself up. You've shown everyone watching that you would rather destroy something beautiful than admit that beauty can exist. Asterisk. The studio was electric. The audience sat in stunned silence, but the energy in the room was palpable. This wasn't the calm, gentle Keanu Reeves the world was used to seeing. Yet somehow it was exactly the version of him they needed to see. Keanu continued, his voice lowering to a dangerously quiet tone. And you know what else you've exposed? Joy? You've shown that you're exactly the kind of person who makes good people want to stop being good. You're the voice in people's heads that says, don't help that stranger people will think you're showing off. You're the reason people hesitate to be generous. Because they know someone like you will question their motives. Asterisk's Joy was visibly shaken now, but she tried one last desperate jab. This is rich, she scoffed, coming from someone having a complete meltdown on live television. Is this the real Keanu Reeves? The calm, centered person you pretend to be. Keanu stood up slowly, his full height towering over the panel. When he spoke, his voice was steady again, but it carried a weight that filled the room. You're absolutely right, Joy, he said. This is the real me. This is someone who spent his entire life trying to be kind, trying to help others, trying to make the world a little better, and who finally reached his limit. When faced with someone determined to convince the world that kindness is a lie. This is someone who's lost everyone he's ever loved and still chooses to love. Someone who's been knocked down by life more times than anyone should be, and still gets up every day trying to lift others up. And yes, this is someone who finally got angry when faced with a person whose job seems to be making sure no one else gets lifted up. Asterisk, he paused, glancing around at the other hosts, then back at Joy, who seemed to have shrunk in her chair. You wanted the real me, Joy? Here I am. I'm someone who believes the world already has enough people tearing each other down, and it needs more people building each other up. I'm someone who believes that when you have a platform, when you have an audience, when you have influence, you have a responsibility to use it for good. And I'm someone who believes that what you've done here today, what you do on this show regularly, is the opposite of good. Asterisk, the silence stretched endlessly. Joy opened her mouth several times, as if to speak, but no words came out. The other hosts sat frozen, unsure what to do. The audience didn't move. Finally, Keanu reached for his jacket hanging on the back of his chair. I think I'm done here, he said quietly. Thank you for having me on the show. I hope that people watching got something valuable out of this conversation, even if it wasn't what anyone expected. He began to walk off the set, then stopped and turned back toward Joy one last time. Joy, he said softly, I genuinely hope that someday you find whatever it is you're looking for by tearing other people down. Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like it's making you very happy. Asterisk, as Keanu walked off the set, the studio remained in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Joy Behar sitting speechless at the table while the man she had tried to expose had instead exposed something far more uncomfortable, the reality of her own approach to the world. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Was Joy Behar out of line, or was she just doing her job? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.